So I'm going to call this meeting to order, and it's 6:37, and people will still be coming in. Come on down. Welcome. Okay, so starting over on your right is Bernie Boudreau from the Select Board. Bernie, just give a little wave. Then Mary Bowen Sullivan, Select Board. Then Matthew, I want to pronounce this correctly, Stirs. He's part of the project management team. And our favorite, Skip Donnell, Fire Chief and Emergency Management Director. And then Tony DeLuzio. Did I pronounce that correctly, Tony? Okay. And Tony is also from project management, and he's also very familiar with Northfield, so that will come out probably in the history. And Andrea Lamas is our town administrator. She's on my left. And then, good thing you're in uniform too. Chief John Hall. Keith Cummings to my right, who's the vice chair of the select board. And John Mcmillan from, help me with the pronunciation, Keolo and Bienick.
Pretty good.
Yes, John Mcmillan, who's the architect. Okay, so we're going to kick this off. Let me get my glasses. I also, before we move on too, I just want to say a huge thank you. Skip's the chair of the Emergency Services Facility Committee, and that committee includes Heath Cummings from the Select Board, Bernie Parada from the Finance Committee, Steve Saradinsky from the Planning Board, Chiefs John Hall, Mark Fortier, Chief of EMS, Mark's in the audience, Skip, we already said that, Skip Donnell, and Dave Quinn, Kevin Connolly, and Alex Parashkov. So this committee has been at it for quite a while, and we'll be going through that. So the whole purpose tonight is to talk about the Emergency Services Facility, or building, whichever you prefer. And in a nutshell, it's to talk about the past, present, and future. So I know I only moved here about 9.5 years ago, and a lot of this predates me moving to town. So in helping with the presentation document, I actually learned quite a few things that go back quite a few years, so longer than a decade. Skip, do you need to call your meeting to order because you have a do you have a quorum
I don't know if he
for the building committee?
does he have a quorum?
I can if you feel is necessary. We have one,
We have 5.
2, 3, 4. I mean, if you feel it's necessary, we'll call the building committee.
Well, how about we take a belts and suspenders approach, and you go ahead and call that meeting to order as well, and we'll note it.
Okay, we'll call the building committee, Emergency Services Building Committee, concurrent with this meeting to order at this time.
At 6:40. Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to get started. Up here on this slideshow, which you've been looking at, are pictures of all of the current facilities. So that's part of the present. The next couple of slides, we're going to dive into the history, and then we're going to talk specifically about the snow parcel that was discussed at the annual town meeting in May. So we're going to come up to date on that, and then talk about geotechnical results. And then we're also going to talk about concept development, like what a building could possibly be like, and what are some of the needs of the different public safety departments. I'm going to help sum it up. So we're going to dive into a lot of detail, and then we're going to come up a level toward the end of the presentation, and then talk about next steps, and look forward to the town meeting next spring. And we'll do questions and answers at the end. Okay, Skip, take it away.
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank you folks for taking the time. This is a public forum. We're hoping for a good explanation on where we are at what we have done in the past as well as where we're headed to in the future. And it's going to take involvement with all the townspeople. So thank you for coming tonight. The first thing I'm going to kind of take a review of is this is actually the second building committee that was formed. The original building committee, who was chaired by Jason Pladdick, actually was in 2007, 2008. And we did an initial look at the fire station and what we can do as far as that building was concerned. And then that actually kind of morphed into a public safety complex on a little bit lower scale, a little bit different scale than what we had. We did start out in 2007, 2008, taking a look at different options, different properties. We then decided that what we really needed to do was do a space needs assessment, okay, by a professional, which is what several other communities had done. So in 2011, Jakunski and Humes were hired as far as that's concerned, and they did a space needs assessment for fire, police, and EMS. We took a look, and at that point, that led to a proposal to basically bring before the townspeople the taking of 91 Main Street, which is the Beehive, which is a big apartment building next door, and basically raising that and then doing a public safety complex there. So the police department moved into the town hall in 1948. At that point, it was I wasn't around, by the way, but that was it was a part-time police department at that point in time, and then of course over the years they became full-time. The existing fire station was actually built in 1953. That's when it was occupied. At that point, when it was initially built, it was a combination highway department and fire department. The highway department was in the basement with 3 bays and a small office area, and then the upper floor, which faces Main Street, is three bays and an office/meeting room. In 2002, the EMTs actually entered into a, 2012? Okay. EMS needed their facility, and they were actually sharing space in the fire station, but we were so cramped that we didn't have hardly any storage for them. So anyway, in 2012, they entered into a contract and rented the existing building that they're in now. So that building is not town-owned. That is a rental property that the EMS organization rents. We did the Jakunski Humes Space Needs Assessment, started it in 2011. Basically, we completed it in 2012. We reviewed it, and the space needs that they had come up with was, as you see, 26,000 square feet needed for fire, police, EMS, as well as emergency management. That entailed a fairly sizable parcel of land in order to build it. We took a look at trying to renovate the fire station and then do an addition on for police and EMS. We couldn't do it on a piece of property that the fire station sits on, so we ended up having to propose that we were going to take at 91 Main Street and do a facility there. That was brought to town meeting, and that vote did not pass. So the committee kind of went dormant for a little while. And then in 2015, it got re-energized. And at that point, we took a look at the site analysis. We did a site assessment. We found out some interesting things. Number one, there was no clear deed to the property the fire station sat on. So we had to go through a legal process as far as making sure that the parcel, even though it had been a school before it was a fire station, unfortunately that burned down. And then we had to make sure that it was deeded properly to the town. So we did some of those things. We got that resolved in 2018. We also took a look at the soils that were out back for building at that location. And we discovered that through some test pits and some test borings, that actually part of the old high school that burnt was buried there, which meant if you're going to do any building there, you can't do it on rubble and material, so that whole area would have to be excavated down to the point where you were down to a good gravel base. So the soil analysis in the lower portion of the lot was not conducive, obviously, to doing a major building down back there. The other issue is there is an easement for the sewer line that crosses that property. You can't really put a building over the top of that sewer line, so that sewer line would have to be relocated. There was also some issues as far as trying to add bays for apparatus down there, and there's an issue with them, the turning radius of them coming out onto School Street, and still trying to keep the footprint as small as possible. So the reason that we have the issue with the fire station is over the years we've always kept the apparatus, the bigger apparatus, the engines and whatnot, in the upper bay so they can come out directly onto Main Street. The building has started to show some structural issues because the weight of the apparatus over the years has gotten a little heavier. We've tried to carry a little bit more water so we can protect the outlying areas that aren't protected by hydrants, that we have to supply our fire resources with tankers. So the trucks now carry 1,000 gallons of water. They got larger pumps. The chassis are bigger than what they used to be, 70 years ago when the fire station was initially built. So it caused some issues, and we actually did a study on the station itself from an structural engineer, found out what the deficiencies were. We had to lighten the load on the upper floors. We were actually getting pieces of concrete dropping down on the apparatus downstairs. So when we, because of the configuration of the fire station, the limited size of the doors, and again, this was built in 1953 when trucks were nowhere near as big, we've had to, over the last 20 plus years, purchase custom built equipment that would fit in less than a 10-foot door, like 9.5 feet high. And we were actually getting chunks of concrete coming from the floor, dropping down onto that apparatus. So we ended up having, after we did the structural analysis, we ended up having to move our apparatus and juggle it around and put it in the downstairs. And the heaviest piece of equipment we can put upstairs is basically a 1-ton pickup, which is a brush truck. The upper floor can no longer support big trucks. That's the bottom line. So it has really hampered how we can operate in that building. So it's a structural load-bearing issue, which has really made it eminent that we have to do something. So so we also did an environmental study of the property down back, and it was decided that for a public safety complex, it just isn't big enough. It isn't buildable. So the focus of the committee was to start to do a site selection to see where we could put a public safety complex for both police, fire, and EMS. The police department has been in the basement of the town hall. I don't know, over the years, I've been the fire chief now for a lot of years. I don't know how many times the basement has flooded along with the senior center down there. And they've had to actually take their records and put them up on cement blocks and whatnot. So there's deficiencies in the town hall as far as space considerations for the police department, as well as it has flooded in the past when the drainage couldn't take all the rainfall out back. So the focus of the committee when it was reinstituted was all 3 public safety services, as well as emergency management. So because they're all dovetailed together. So basically that's the kind of the history behind it. We do have a matrix that you see to the right-hand side. It's not very easy to really take a look at the matrix. I invite you to either look at the website, or it's also available at the town hall. It tells you the different parcels that we have looked at to see if they're capable of supporting a public safety complex. There are some things that come into play when we look at site selection. One of them, or one of the key ones, is we still have a call volunteer fire department that protects the town. There are still call members of EMS, so they have to respond to a building, wherever it's located, to get the emergency vehicles to respond back out to provide the emergency services that we need to. So proximity of where the facility is located is key, as far as being located close enough so first responders can get there in a timely manner, and also fairly centrally located so that they can get back out to provide the emergency services that they have to. The police department, I don't want to speak for John, but the police department, for the most part, are already out on patrol. So it's not like they always have to respond from a location or a building. But for EMS and for fire, it's eminent that we have something that's centrally located. So we started to take, and we have looked at property in West Northfield, we've looked at property in Northfield Farms, we've looked at property all around the center of town. And this matrix shows you the different parcels of property and what the criteria that it didn't meet and a reason why we didn't pursue it. So the other thing we take a look at is when we're building a facility such as this, there are issues as far as town water or public water, public sewer, which is important, access for first responders, as well as three-phase power for the building. So because the facility has to be able to be used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, regardless of storms or weather or whatever. So it's imperative that we have those features. The biggest issue with the town sewer is both EMS and fire, and occasionally police department as well, are running into situations where personnel can be coming back from a call, and I can speak for the fire department. When we are doing aggressive firefighting and doing interior firefighting, our turnout gear and equipment and breathing apparatus is getting contaminated. A big push has just started to happen in the last 8 to 10 years, where they're finding that full-time as well as call and volunteer firefighters have a much higher rate of cancer, and it's because of the carcinogens that they're exposed to. So we have to have the capability of trying to keep our firefighters as clean as possible. So the only way we could accomplish that was we ended up putting washing machine that cleans the turnout gear in the downstairs kitchen of the fire station. Is it ideal? No, it's not. But the bottom line is that's going to continue to be an issue. We have to make sure that we can decontaminate our personnel as well as our equipment. And if that has to go into a municipal sewer system, okay, where it can be properly treated. If we don't have a sewer line near the facility, then we have an issue where you cannot just let it go out into a septic system. You cannot let that go out into the environment. You have to contain it in a tank, and then you have to pump that tank out and process that wastewater. So it makes a lot more sense to put it in a location where you have water, sewer, three-phase power, and in fairly close proximity for first responders to get to the apparatus and respond back. That's for the fire department. Police department and EMTs have biological issues. Okay, they have contamination that they got to deal with in the same manner. So, being connected to a municipal septic system is key, and it really has to happen. So, unless anybody's got any questions, I think the only other thing that I wanted to touch on is, after looking at numerous properties, taking a look and evaluating what they are. This is all in the matrix that's open, it's available to the public. By all means, take a look at it, read it. We actually put out an RFP after we had done the study, because a lot of people say, well, what about this piece of property? Or, well, what about that piece of property? Well, the ones that were suggesting different parcels are some that we had already looked at, and people were suggesting properties that they didn't own, okay? So we put out an RFP. The committee did, along with the Board of Selectmen, put out an RFP saying if there's anybody that has a parcel that they are looking to make available for the town, we gave a time period, we gave the parameters of what we were looking for and why we were looking for it, and we never got one single proposal back. So that's where we were up until that point. So that's kind of the history of what has gone on, and that's why we have done the site selection, and that's why we developed the matrix. So it's open, it's public, and anybody can take a look at it. And we're going to wait for questions and answers at the end, B?
We're going to do questions at the end.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out on that slide, in parallel to the committee work, the town had a grant, and there was a visioning that we did with, I believe, the Collins Center at UMass Boston, and they did a survey of the public safety departments that Skip has talked about, as well as conducted a public forum, and that, interestingly enough, was approximately a year ago here in the cafeteria, which was to share the results of the survey with the public and to do some circles. We used the round tables to actually get ideas and concerns from citizens on the results of that survey. So I believe the survey dealt with the personnel issues and characteristics of the department. So, for example, one of the things that came back was just how strong a commitment each of the volunteers and employees have to the town of Northfield. Was really a very revealing characteristic from that survey, because it just indicated how strongly people feel about working for Northfield. But we did use the public forum to talk about a new facility and what people thought about that. And there was a lot of concern expressed and a lot of interest from public safety employees themselves that a new facility be as efficient and cost-effective as possible. So I just wanted to point that out. And then also, as part of your site matrix, Skip, you guys identified the snow parcel, was what we're calling it, the plot on Main Street that's going to be discussed at length tonight, was identified in 2021. And it was identified because it met both the town recreation and conservation goals, as well as had potential to support a facility. And that was, that takes us to the last May's town meeting. Okay, and then you also, I know for a fact, because people asked me, they had some suggestions. So we did the formal RFP for sites, but you also entertained informal suggestions as well. And many of those, I think, dovetailed back to your site matrix. So that's why the document ended up being important, is because we found we were talking about some of the same ideas that you guys had already entertained over the years. So why don't we move on to the next slide and talk about the snow parcel in detail, because coming out of the town meeting, we really had to figure out whether or not a portion of that could in fact be used for a facility. So we had to do quite a few things, and we're going to start with talking about wetlands delineation, which was a major concern for folks.
Yes, hi, thank you. Tony DeLuzio, Colliers. The town embarked on what was called Phase 1, and you may have heard that term used in the past. So Phase 1 was kind of what we termed proof of concept. Does the concept of putting a building on this property work? What are the negatives? What are the positives of it? What are the criteria that we would need to deal with in order to satisfy the programming for police, fire, and EMS? And so one of the first things we do when we look at a site, we do a physical land survey. get the engineers involved to identify wetlands, any kind of buildable constraints. Is there ledge? What's the geology like? What's the plant life like? What's the biology on site? Living creatures. We do endangered species, habitat reviews. All of those activities were being conducted in the early stages of this phase one approach. What architects do, and you'll hear from the architect in a little bit, is they want to design a building. That's what we're hiring them to do, the program, the square footage, but they need to know what site am I working with. And in this case, the site was massively big, over 25 acres, but how much of it is really buildable, how much of it is accessible. When you understand that the parameters for the building are not residential, it's a police, fire, public safety facility, there's certain vehicular and pedestrian patterns that are going to come to play in that type of a facility. So first thing we did is looking at the overall property. Wetlands become a big piece of it, and many of you are probably very familiar with the site. So the areas in green, you've got the river running through there. That green dash line, there's a 50-foot buffer to the wetland, which is considered a no-build zone. So we can't disrupt anything in there. There's no building in there. And then we move to the 100-foot buffer zone, which is that dotted line. We're able to do certain activities in there. It requires conservation approval. It needs to be permitted for such. And as the design progresses later on, we'd have to go through those commissions and get what's called an order of conditions. Any replication that happens, any disturbances that happens within that buffer zone needs to be done in a controlled and managed fashion. The blue hatched area that you see is a 200-foot river setback. So you see it starts to shape out the only buildable area that we have but in this lower corner here. And what we've done is superimpose the shape of the building in the corner where it is currently intended to fit. So we had an architect come on, do the programming, do the square footage that Skip had talked about, been done earlier back in 2012, thereabouts, went through and refined that and cut it back and got down to what is our minimal square footage that we have today. What does that footprint look like, even though we haven't worked out all the internal workings of the building, but how would it fit? Would it fit on this site, which gave the town the ability to say, yes, this site is feasible, it does work, it proves the concept that you could put a public safety building there. If you go and you look at that matrix, the matrix had yellow, red, and green coloring on it. So anything that had a red highlight was a very negative aspect to that project. It was either going to cost money or otherwise constrict the project's success. Yellow may have meant, yes, you can do it, but again, it's going to be costly, it's going to be difficult, there's going to be some construction restraints to it. For this particular project, you would see there are many green boxes. That was giving us the green light. We've got the three-phase power. We've got the proximity that Skip spoke of. We've got mainline water on the main street. We've got good access. We can pull large apparatus in off the main street. Everything can be configured. Vehicular parking for on-call responders, public parking for visitors that come to the facility, separation of police and fire apparatus and EMS apparatus on the site. All of those things can be handled here without disturbing the wetlands, without getting into a lot of onerous and costly conditions. And so that's kind of the overlay of the wetlands and the kind of topographical issues. It sets up very well. I'm going to have Matt now talk about the geotech. He was out here because as part of that phase one, we also bring out geotechnical engineers, and they do what's typically referred to as drilling and borings and test pits. And that gives us that subsurface information. And Matt was out here managing that process that you see here. Matt?
Thanks, Tony. Can everybody hear me okay? My
Pull it
microphone,
closer.
is that better?
Well,
Okay, thank you. So as Tony said, we beginning in May, we began to conduct a geotechnical field investigations, which centered around two principal activities. There were test borings done to locate areas within that parcel that Tony was describing on the previous slide, where there might be bedrock. We wanted to locate that. We wanted to locate groundwater. And also, we wanted to dig test pits to perform a qualitative assessment on the type of soil material that we were finding below grade. And so in early May, we worked with geotechnical engineer O'Reilly, Talbot, and Okun, or OTO, and their drilling subconsultant to conduct the borings, and then worked with the Northfield DPW and their mini excavator to conduct the test pits. So the principal activity there was to perform the qualitative assessment of the soils. We also wanted to look at the site drainage. Does this subsurface material that we're encountering have the right physical and drainage properties to make it conducive to support a building? This first slide sort of describes the what and the when. So that was early to mid-May. The borings were conducted, the test pits followed shortly, and the photos document the extent to which we were extremely careful to minimize the disturbance to the site in the process of conducting those exercises. Folks were very conscientious of that throughout this process. I think the next slide discusses some of the results of what we found. I guess I'll begin with the first point, which is, most importantly, we did not encounter any bedrock at an elevation that would make it adverse for building construction. In fact, there were no conditions at all that were found that would make this more difficult or more costly to construct a facility at this location than a nominal site. So the bedrock was down below any elevation where we would anticipate it causing a conflict with a foundation. And as you can see here on some of these photos, particularly the one in the upper right, the material that we found through both the borings and the test pits was a very granular material, which generally has good bearing properties, and also through the tests that OTO did on the drainage properties, it performed well in that category as well. As I mentioned, we were looking also at the water table and as a possible concern. In the highest elevation at which we found groundwater was around 5 feet below grade. In some of the test pits, we did not encounter any at all, which tells us there's variable conditions down there, but nothing that we found would suggest that there was anything adverse in that category either. What else did I want to say? The material in some of the test pits, again, was granular. In some cases, it was almost uniformly sand, suggesting that there had been prior filling activity in some of those areas. But in general, the findings were certainly not adverse in any way, but also potentially advantageous in terms of the bearing capacity or expected bearing capacity, I should say, of the material that we found below grade.
Great. So if I can wrap up on that. And then, so with the good quality findings, no real constraints that we had to work with, we've now at that phase, we've got our land survey, we've got our topography, we've got all of our subsurface conditions. During that time, the architect is conducting his programming, which is going through with the three chiefs and the three departments what those spaces are. And now we start to what's called test fit the site. So how big of a building, how many square feet, and that's really where Kalo Bieniek comes in next.
Over here, so don't blind you with my laser. Good. Good evening. Sorry, that's not close enough. I'm stretched out here. I'm at the end of the line. Can you boost this?
There's a mic behind you.
Should be able to just slide the floor box.
Or you can try to do that. Thank you.
Analog adjustments.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is John Mcmillan, and I'm an architect with Caleb Bieniek Architect. We're providing architectural services for the emergency service facility. As Tony mentioned to you, the site itself is over about 23 acres. Of the available upland along Main Street, there's approximately 2 to 3 acres. The site that we're looking at, the overall site development that we've looked at conceptually is about a 2-acre site on the overall area. The site itself is constrained by riverfront and wetlands area. The development of this site, though, does not impact in any way any of the existing wetlands on the property. We are in the buffer zone, but the wetlands themselves are right here. You see these sharp lines up here. So that is the actual bordering wetlands that we have. And they're up here, and we're not, our construction is down here. So we are not impacting any wetlands at all. We are working within the buffer space, which is allowed. The dark blue is a 50-foot, which is a no-build zone. The light blue is between 50 and 100, and construction is allowed as long as it's compliant with any regulations or requirements of the Conservation Commission. The overall design, the conceptual part of this project is a traditional one-story building right here, gabled roof. Wanted to keep it very traditional looking, moderately scaled, to be a good neighbor, fit in with the residential context that we have here and the very traditional historic Main Street area. There is a large apparatus facility in the back. We sort of tucked that behind there. That's sort of the business end of the building. We used to have those large fire apparatus doors, and outside of those doors, sometimes you'll see training or the fire engines themselves. So through several design iterations, we ended up with a drive-through apparatus bay, which basically means there's actually room for 2 apparatus back-to-back in the apparatus bay. So either an apparatus can drive through or an apparatus can be turned, backed in, so it all what we call frontline vehicles. So there's 4 bays, I think 5 bays here. The fire apparatus can come out either way, and you don't have to,
Maybe that'll help.
okay, but go back again, please. The fire apparatus, in having a apparatus bay where you do not drive out both sides, you'd have 2 engines, one in front of the other. And you'd have to jockey those engines or apparatus if you wanted the rear one out for a particular emergency, which would slow down your response time, which was not acceptable. So by having a drive-through bay, and drive-through is misleading, it's actually all frontline vehicles. You have 5 frontline vehicles here, 5 frontline vehicles here. We're referring to both EMS and fire apparatus. And they can come out, and by coming out with a longer driveway, there's a safer approach to Main Street. They're not just, if the fire bays were here in our original design, they'd come out and immediately be upon Main Street. So this was considered a safer approach, leaving for the apparatus to leave the facility. The other advantage of this particular site is that, if you've seen the site, of course, you know that it's sloping down towards the wetlands. There's approximately a 7 to 10 foot change of grade across here. So we've taken the apparatus bays and we've stepped them down lower than the main floor of the building here. That allows us further to minimize the appearance of that, of the apparatus bays. What we're hoping to achieve by that is by reducing the appearance of this or the visibility of this from Main Street, we can use a more cost-effective, less expensive method of capturing that space, possibly a pre-engineered metal building, where we can actually create a clear span and do so in a very economical manner. The other part of this project is separation of the parking areas. We have public parking on one side. There's about 6 to 8 spaces here. There's a little, there'll be a grass area here for overflow parking during particular events or emergencies. But first responder is on this side. We're segregating the first responder parking so they'd be able to come in, park here. This is police and fire and EMS, and approach the building through here. There's a little carport back here, which would be an alternate project to put a carport over some police vehicles to keep them out of the weather when the officers are inside and they need to keep running. There's also a sally port, which is, we'll go into that when we see the interiors, but one of the difficulties you have with your existing police facility is any person who's an arrestee or a prisoner of the police department, police, has to be taken from their vehicle outdoors through any type of weather, ice or snow, and brought into the facility. In modern police facilities, that is done inside a garage facility called a sally port. Doors are shut, so when you take the prisoner out, there's no hope of escape. He's not looking to run, basically, and it's safer for all involved. Next slide, please. So the design of the overall facility, you can see here very quickly, is the police are identified in blue, fire and EMS in red, and the bridge common spaces are in yellow. I will point out that one special feature of this building is that this is probably the only building in town you have that's going to be occupied and operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So we designed it to be a very resilient structure. We originally started with this project, and it was mentioned before, the space needs study. So in Jakunski and Hume's space needs study in 2012 came up with about 25,000 square feet. Last year, beginning of this project, the chiefs got together and they unto themselves brought that down to about 19,000 or so square feet. When we were brought on board, we were asked to continue to whittle away at the space needs, create a smaller, more effective, cost-effective building, and we've got it down to a little over 17,000 square feet. So overall, there's been about 6,000 square foot savings in area to the building, which would translate in today's dollars to be about $5 million. So we've saved about $5 million by reducing the areas, certain areas of the building. Some of the priorities that we have for creating this design was to create a cost-effective, capable, and modern facility. To give you a little design guidance in this project, you can consider the police facility is a very secure area. They've got evidence that has changed custody rules. They have people there that may be aggravated. They have guns. They have a need for greater security than the rest of any department here. So access through this area is supervised, and that is part of a police facility. So there's not much we can do for sharing spaces here, but there are spaces in these bridge areas that are more common to a police headquarters that can be shared. We have initially coming off the lobby here, a shared reception, coming to a shared common meeting training room, which is also be the emergency operations center should there be any special events. in town or in the region. There is a conference room so that anyone coming into the facility, a small group, or a citizen needing to speak to the fire or police department can do so, and they can do so right off the lobby. They don't need to be transferred through either department. They can sort of be contained within a small area off the lobby. This is an area also where you may have a witness to a crime or a victim of a crime coming in, and you really want to get them off the lobby as quickly as possible so you can bring them in to this witness victim interview space, sort of a multi-purpose space, conference space. And from there, they can come back out and they don't have to re-enter the lobby. So if they were a witness or a victim, the police department could bring them out into their facility and protect them and keep them out of the lobby and keep them out of someone else's field of vision, so to speak. Also in the common spaces, we have a kitchen, day room, break space for meals. And then simply mechanical, electrical spaces are also shared because it's one building and they can share those spaces. On the fire EMS side, those two departments are fully integrated. All these spaces are pretty much shared between the both departments. The only things they don't share is some private office space. There are offices, and all of the office and occupied areas we keep to the perimeter to improve daylight, reduce energy. There are some locker rooms, showers, lavatories on the inside, some bunk space, and then there's the 5 bays of the apparatus. First bay is EMS, and then there's 4 bays for fire. And there's support spaces, SCBA, laundries. As Skip was mentioning, there's decontamination, decon, storage, areas where the firemen would come off their vehicles, go in, basically wash themselves with their turnout gear on, then take the turnout gear off, put it in a specialty dryer. These are very expensive pieces of equipment, the turnout gear, very particular and safe ways to clean them and make them last and dry them off. It's a very particular process. There's also an area over here if you can also continue to take a shower and get into your street clothes, basically. If you are contaminated or EMS, even police can have biologics. You know, you can have anything from someone upchucking on you to bleeding on you to all sorts of other more serious issues of hepatitis C and similar types of diseases. So there's decon over in the back here. I think I've touched on most of the subjects. If I could. Yes, Skip, sorry.
Yeah, there's just a couple of things that I want to kind of reiterate on. This is not the first design. This is like the third or fourth version of the conceptual design that we've taken a look at and we have tweaked. I've got to say that from the original Juhunski-Hume space needs assessment, as far as what their feeling and the needs for the town were. After the first project, obviously didn't pass town meeting vote. We went to work and we reduced square footage as much as we thought we possibly could. And then John and his crew started to do a conceptual design of a building. And then the 3 department heads, Mark, John, and myself, got together and we actually cut the square footage down even further. One thing we did omit, because we wanted to make sure that we were doing a facility that not only meets the needs of the emergency services of Northfield for today, but we have to look down the road. And unfortunately, small communities are facing the issues of staffing and volunteering. I will admit, Northfield has a phenomenal EMS and fire department. The EMS is relying on call people. Your firefighters are all call. And we have the fire department has a very healthy membership at 31 people right now, which is phenomenal for a small community. But the bottom line is, a couple things that we took a look at is when we wanted to reduce space, we felt as though we did need a facility that, should staffing have to change and full-time, people would have to staff the station to provide the protection maybe 10 years down the road, maybe 15 years down the road. It didn't make any sense not to include at least a sleeping area and a shower area for personnel. We would be remiss, I would be remiss, I mean, I'm not going to be the chief, you know, at that point in time. But the bottom line is we would be remiss if we didn't include that in the vision of what needed to be. The final sign-off by EMS, police, and fire were we actually reduced the square footage again. We shared more of the common areas. So that, yes, I mean, we have a small conference room that the police department can use for either witnesses to come in and discuss stuff with them. They can use it as a small meeting room, a small conference room. It's separate from the large meeting room. We pared that room down. We figured how many people we needed to be able to house in that. So we pared the lobby down. We pared a lot of the things down. The other thing that we pared down was when we did the initial Jakunski-Humes study back in 2012, we looked at having a large community room. Knowing we need to be as frugal as we possibly could and do a facility that will house your emergency services now and for the foreseeable future, and we're talking 25, 30, 40 years down the road, that we squeezed everything down and shrunk everything to a point where this is what we came up with. And that's how we reduced the square footage, is by sharing the facilities and still keeping it operational for all three entities, as well as emergency management. So I did want to just point that out. The other thing that John touched on is I probably was the one that was pushed for the drive-through bays or the ability to have apparatus exit without having to jockey equipment around. Because given if we stack equipment one behind the other, then there's going to be an issue with the engines. It's not so bad, but when you start talking about the rescue and the brush truck and the brush tanker and the boat and whatnot, if you have to take the time to jockey equipment around to get the appropriate piece of equipment out to the emergency, you're wasting time, okay? And time is usually in an emergency of the essence. So this configuration, even though it's classified as drive-through, isn't technically drive-through. It can be, but the biggest thing is that any piece of emergency equipment, whether it be the rescue truck for auto extrication, or whether it be the boat for water rescue, whether it be an engine, the brush tanker, or whatever, any piece of equipment can immediately, as soon as it's manned, respond without having to move apparatus around to get it to where it needs to be in town. So we actually took John's initial concept and we actually spun it 180 degrees. We took a look at the doing what we call a drive-through, where it's apparatus doors on each side of it, which made it, from an operational standpoint, much better. It didn't add anything to the facility, as far as space-wise. It just gave the fire department and EMS better access to their apparatus. The other change we made is, if John can point out, because of the equipment and the decontamination part of what we were trying to do, we actually moved our SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus area, our decontamination area and whatnot, and put it on the far end of the apparatus bay. So any of the contaminants, whether it be fire, police, or EMS, they can decontaminate on the opposite side of the meeting and housing and whatnot areas of the building. So you will not be bringing any contaminants whatsoever back into the main part of the building. They'll all be outside and on the opposite side of the apparatus, and that's all accessible. So between sharing facilities we were able to pare it down to the point where we're at right now. And like I said, it will serve the town very, very well now and in the long-term future. So, the other thing that people don't probably know, when we have a bad storm, like a snowstorm or a blizzard or high wind warnings where we have a lot of power down and power outages and whatnot, because it takes longer in a storm situation for first responders to get to the station, whether it be fire or EMS. We have in the past manned the station with both EMS and fire during those emergencies to cut down, number one, to cut down our response time and make sure we can get out to the issues as they arise. We have no sleeping quarters. We have no place that you can bunk out, even one or two people. We put our chairs together and make a platform where we can catch a few Z's. We've been known to lay across the front seat of the apparatus to try to get some rest. This would, at least for the time being, give us an area that we could actually have some staff and they could bunk in and still be in very close proximity to the apparatus. But looking down the road and down in the future, if we needed full-time personnel to staff, especially like during the daytime, or if we even needed to do a round-the-clock night shift, I'm talking 20, 30 years down the road, that is already part of this facility. We have felt we had to build that in. Thank you.
One final statistic, the overall area of this building, first floor is about 17,800, 17,700. In looking at the existing police, fire, and EMS areas, they total to be about 8,000 square feet. So this building itself is a little over 2 times the area of the existing facility. If you've been to the existing facilities, you wouldn't begrudge them twice the amount of space. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. And Skip, I'm just going to jump onto a couple of points that I remember from what you've said prior.
Sure.
So we're currently in at least in, I think this is true for EMS as well, is in terms of vehicles, we're currently constrained by the current facility in terms of what is actually, if you look at your capital plan in the future, there are certain types of vehicles, there are, and as well as water storage on the vehicles that cannot be done or purchased because of the current size of the building. So obviously, that's been taken care of in this concept as well, right? It doesn't.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We are able to carry 1,000 gallons of water on our 2 frontline engines. We can't go with any more because it would require us to take the vehicle and it'd have to be raised a little bit higher. We only have 9.5-foot doors down back, and we are limited to the length of the vehicle. So if we wanted to do a tanker to better cover our rural areas, we'd be looking at having our engines, carry at least 1,250 or 1,500 gallons of water. We're unable to do that now. We have to make sure that we spec and custom build the apparatus, so including the warning lights and everything else have to be below that 9'6". So we have height constraints, we have length constraints, and we have width constraints that only allow us to build it so I can do the best protection we can do for the community. But if you go to a facility like this, obviously it widens your array of what you can do. We have a rescue truck now that we're having a hard time finding even a replacement for it because it just won't fit the building. So there's been some apparatus restraints as well as operational restraints. So it has caused its issues, and it'll continue until we can get to a facility that can better house better equipment that can better protect the town.
Okay. And then one other point that I remember on the police side is we are not building, looking at John, and I'm gonna turn to you next, and John Hall, you're not building anything in terms of containing prisoners. You're not building cells or anything like that. That was one of your priorities. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, just to, because I think that also speaks to the policing needs and the focus on victims and witnesses.
Yes. Did you build the UMass facility?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm coming from UMass, and they actually built UMass. And I think when you build new, sometimes you, there was a jokes about it at the last meeting that we had about having a hot tub and a spa and everything. That's not what we're looking for. We're just looking for the essentials. And the big thing to me is to make sure that it has a good flow to the police department, that the stuff that you need is there, because in the future, you're going to need that stuff, and then you have to be able to expand there. So which refers to booking, the booking room. We don't need cells at Northfield at the present time. We utilize Franklin County Sheriff's Department to bring our prisoners there. There's added liability in keeping prisoners, so worst case scenario, we have a protective custody, but even then, we'd like to bring them to the hospital as opposed to have the liability to keep them at the police station, because normally we only have one officer on at a time. So the officer is tied up with a prisoner. That's all the more time that they can't be out on patrol going to other calls. So we like to take someone into custody, book them, and then bring them, and that's why the Sally Port is important also. Bring them into the Sally Port that's secure, bring them to the booking room, and that can all be done if it's planned with a good flow with one officer, and you're not going to have to call maybe Irving or Gil to come and help you out. One officer can deal with one prisoner depending on how disorderly they are. But that being said, they don't really need to go into a cell. So I kind of ruled that out in the beginning, that Northfield doesn't need cells. That doesn't mean in the future that another police chief might say, hey, we'd like to have a cell. Maybe Franklin County Sheriff's Department isn't accepting our prisoners or something to that extent. So it's still there, but it's taken down to.
You want to go back a slide and just point out where that is? So it has
Yeah.
the capability, but what you were saying is you're not hardening in terms of, it would need to be hardened in terms of materials?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you have room to expand it in the future, but it's not necessary now. And that's just to have one cell. So normally, if you build a police department, you have multiple cells. You have the male and female sides, and maybe a juvenile section. But we didn't need all that. That was a huge cut in our square footage by cutting out those type of things, which I know that they're appealing for police officers to have that. It's great to have all that, but it's really not necessary, and it's not worth it, in my opinion, the amount of money that it would cost the community.
And then one other small point that I found really fascinating was that the materials that you would use in hardening a cell would actually affect sound quality in the other parts of the work areas, as well as potentially interview rooms, because of the type of material.
Yes, that's probably going to have to be, we'll have to have some discussion, but my personal opinion on it is that a lot of the cells and detention areas I've been into that are cement blocked or concrete or something of that nature, the acoustics are too much. You can't hear anything. So a lot of times we have video cameras in that area and we pick up evidence. So if we're booking someone may give us evidence, and it's tough to hear what they're saying. So, and at the same time, we're not taking in a lot of people that we're all that worried about, like tunneling out of our prison, because we're only having for an hour or two. So it doesn't have to be built like Fort Knox. It can be just a regular drywall type of wall or something like that. So you don't have to put all that money into like the jail cell that you've seen on TV, where it's all cement and you can barely hear anything. I've had personal interviews in interview rooms that I couldn't even use the interview because during the interrogation, after I listened to the video, it was you couldn't hear anything because the room was just too escape-proof. But I don't think we really need that in Northfield.
Okay, and then Mark from EMS, I know you already have people sleeping overnight in your building. So are there other things that you want to point out about this design from an EMS standpoint?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Is that working, or do you want?
Yeah, he turned it up.
Okay.
There we go.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
So just to circle back a little bit on the initial question about custom vehicles for the building. The rented building currently that EMS occupies at 41 Main Street, the good news is that our vehicles do fit in there today. The bad news is that's all that fits in there today. As a reminder, is that last annual town meeting, we've approved the purchase of a new ambulance, which is currently being built. We had an estimated 500-day lead time on this ambulance, so it is coming. When that one arrives, we're going to be hard-pressed, really like sardines, putting both of these vehicles into that current building. It will fit, but it's going to be very tight, so there'll be no room for anything else. Skip had mentioned the moving to full-time staffing. From an EMS perspective, we basically are already there. We have people that are taking shifts, coming to the station, and they're basically sleeping on the couch at night because we have no other place to put them. The current facility, if you went back all the way to the first slide where we said, EMS started to rent the space in 2012. That was the result of, as Skip was mentioning, the sparring of the cement coming off the ceiling. And I said, I'm not going to have this stuff coming down on my ambulance. It's time for me to get out from underneath these floors. So that's where we ended up renting the building down the road. But the building, if it wasn't for the fact that we had moved out of the fire station, their space needs to be even worse than they are today. So the fact that we were able to rent the space down the road did save us a few more years on this project. Unfortunately, we can't kick this can down the road any further. I apologize, B. What was the question that you had for me this last time?
No, I think you covered it. We were talking about that you already have people who are staying overnight, so it's not a future requirement, it's actually a current requirement.
Correct. Right, as of today, I could use those bunk spaces today for our current staffing. We're on track for almost 900 calls this year. We are very robust and very in need, and it's an ongoing process, obviously.
Thank you, Mark. So Mark will be around for questions too. 2 more slides, folks, and then we'll get right to the Q&A. This slide, what I'm trying to do here is really talk about the committee as well as the select board. Sometimes it's not clear to people who does what when. And so on the left-hand side, just to sum up what we've already talked about, the task of the team, and when I say team, I include the committee as well as the project managers and the architect, was tasked with finalizing the geotechnical analysis on the snow parcel, determining if there were any other sites available, and as Skip mentioned, that was both informal suggestions as well as a formal RFP between June and July of this past year. And also that each chief would sign off on their space needs being met, so individually as well as together. And also, as Skip mentioned, the conceptual design was a process over the last few months of using 3 to 4 versions with the architect to consider many different factors, including the wetlands, the fire trucks, as Skip has so beautifully described. I always think of drive, when somebody says drive-through, I think we all think of like, okay, I'm getting my coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, and that's not the case. This is just really about making sure that you can get the appropriate vehicle out with no delays, not having to move like the rest of us in the winter, like, honey, you got to move the car so I can get my car out type thing. Really, it was, I think, a task and something that I looked at closely. I'm not on the committee, but I attended most of the committee meetings as well as the geotechnical investigations. Both Skip and I were on site. And so what Skip has been tasked with is periodically not just handling the committee and all of the tasks with the project manager and the architect, but coming to the select board on a regular basis to update us as well as the public on what's going on. So their meetings are public, the select board meetings are public, and basically at these key points, for example, this presentation of the conceptual design was done at the committee meeting back on August 31st, as well as at the select board on September 20th. So this is the third time we're actually looking at the concept. And what I wanted to point out on the right-hand side is that the select board is responsible for reviewing and approving recommendations from the committee, as well as any committee, plus approving contracts. So the committee might make a recommendation, but the select board is the board that ends up signing the contract, actually approving it, reviewing it, and signing, negotiating as needed. So in this case, when you look at the bottom in the italicized text, what I wanted to point out is, especially coming out of the last town meeting in May, since then, what I'm saying here is that the committee has fulfilled all of those steps and tasks. The select board, and they presented their recommendation to the select board on September 20th. The select board voted to accept the recommendation for the site and the concept at its September 20th meeting. So this effectively concludes what has been called phase 1, for those of you who've been following this process closely, and starts phase 2. We wanted to have a clear distinction between those tasks that came out of the town meeting and the ones that lead us to the next town meeting. So we're calling that next phase 2. So in the past year, in parallel to a lot of the committee work, the select board has been responsible for all the contracts associated with the consultants, the project manager, the architect, also the appraiser. So the parcel was appraised formally, real estate negotiations, and the creation of warrant articles going into the town meeting. Per the town meeting, the snow parcel is to be paid for from the cell tower easement revenue fund, which is $170,000. So that is money that's specifically set aside and comes from our from the cell tower's use of that particular site. Is it at the transfer station?
It's the sale of the permanent easement for this site at the transfer station.
Okay, thank you. In terms of real estate, the purchase and sale agreement for the snow parcel was signed on October 4th at the select board meeting. There are, FYI, additional real estate steps coming up. October 19th, this was a new one for me, there is a publishing of the determination of uniqueness, which Andrea can help me with this one. That is a state requirement, and the land, because there were not multiple bids on the land, the transparency of the sale must be recorded in a state register, so that becomes public. Not only as it normally would at the county or local level, it also becomes a public document at the state level. Did I describe that enough?
Yeah, at the central register, where all bids, it's a procurement issue. All bids have to be published, and therefore all the follow-up to bids. And because there was no bid, we didn't get any, we have to publish the results anyway, which in this case is a determination that it's unique.
Okay. And then on October 27th, the planning board, which is a separate board from the select board and elected, reviews the A&R, which is short for approval not required. And that is the formal step that creates 2 lots or plots where there was 1. So there will now be 2 lots. One is the Snows property, going up to the golf course, obviously, and the second lot will now be the town's. And then on November 30th, we actually do a closing. So leading into phase 2, really the goals between now and next town meeting would be taking the concept and developing actual design details so that costs can be estimated, and then any kind of approval, this is where a lot of people have asked questions over the last few months, seeking approvals. This is where the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, and other bodies will be involved in phase 2. So we can just go on to the second slide, and then, Tony, you can just walk us through, this will be the last one before the Q&A, but just walk us through from a project schedule standpoint, the milestones between now and next spring.
Sure, thank you. You did a good job hitting on the permitting and the planning aspect of it. So what you see here, many of the items that we've checked off that we've completed through site selection in phase 1 have been collapsed. So if you look at the numbers on the far left-hand side, you no longer kind of go in order. 11 jumps to 7 to the 20s. Can't really read those, can you? But anyways, we've compressed some of those and we've completed a lot of the items with phase 1 being done, the site work being done that we talked about, hiring the architect and getting through our proof of concept. And now, really, before we can get to planning, zoning, those types of permitting activities, you need a much greater set of drawings. Even though we're able to point out where the wetlands are and where the boundaries are and where the buffers are, we need now to be able to provide actual calculations on drainage. We're creating impervious area with parking lots and buildings. That flow needs to be captured. We need to be able to talk about pre-construction runoff versus post-construction. And we need to make sure that we're balancing the site. With Main Street, it actually falls under Mass DOT. So we need to design the curb cuts. We need to make sure that we have lines of sight, that the apparatus can see vehicles approaching in each direction. We need to go through the state process to get them to buy off on our curb cuts and our openings. So a lot more design drawings have to be done just to get us to that permitting stage. And we anticipate that will be happening somewhere Christmas, January, December, January timeframe, where we're actually making presentations. All of those boards have public hearings, which again will be notified through the public process here. We expect that residents and constituents and concerned parties will come out and really be able to hear at those meetings what the details are of conservation, what their orders of conditions are, what planning board is requiring. You know, for site plan approval, we get into things like lighting, curbing, snow storage areas. When you plow, where are you going to pile up the snow? All of those nitty-gritty details get presented to each of those boards for their review and approval, and there's oftentimes hearings that go along with that. Once we get their criteria, then we can actually move into construction documents and construction bid documents. That's another couple-month process for the architect to take all of the requirements from the town boards, committees, hearings, planning board, everybody. Now we put those into working drawings that we'll actually build from. With that done in a couple of months, we expect somewhere in February 2023 to be able to embark on a bid process, which in the state we have, as Andrea mentioned, very stringent procurement processes. I won't get into the chapters and the laws that dictate those, but that's about an 8-week process to get through a public bid procurement. We have site meetings and hearings and open bid process. We get sub-bids in first and then general bidders. There's a whole process, all of which is done under public scrutiny and transparency to bring the best number that we can to the town. All of that moving forward with a successful town meeting and a successful bid in April, we'd be able to start shortly after April with groundbreaking, tree clearing, and construction taking 12 to 15 months. Generally, if we get started in the spring, we certainly want the building closed in for that winter of 2023, so we're able to work inside during the winter months and have the building completed. So,
Okay.
there you go.
All right, thank you. And so noted on here, we have discussed having a special town meeting as opposed to combining it all into the annual town meeting and making it super duper long. what we talked about was having a special town meeting in April 2023 so that we could redo this public forum at that point in time, as well as do the special town meeting and just focus in on this huge topic, because we're sure, even with this group here tonight, I wanted to remind people that we are filming this, and this is on Facebook Live, as well as on BNC TV. The Comcast channel, I think, is 17. So we're going to turn to Q&A, and what I would ask is just come down to the microphone, lean into that microphone, and state your name and your location in Northfield, just so that we have that for the record. And yes.
And I just want to just do one other thing before we get into the Q&A.
Sure thing.
If you're all set.
Go ahead.
Okay. Couple of things. I've heard people have gotten the opinion and the idea that the acquisition and the vote that was taken at the town meeting, that this was a sure thing. In all honesty, with all the testing and whatnot that you see that we have done since the town meeting, it shows that this is a viable parcel for recreation as well as the facility. The facility is going to take up about 10% or less of the property. The rest of the property that has been utilized for recreation is going to continue to be able to be utilized for recreation. And the
Correct.
second,
Yeah, thank you. And as we think we pointed out on one of the maps, I
Yeah.
found the overhead map really helpful because it shows now that most of the wetlands in that area are now on town-owned property. So there were
Correct.
some conservation and other recreation goals, thanks, that
Yep.
were addressed in the open space recreation plan that we do every 7 years for the town. So we rely quite heavily on that document that was done by the Open Space Committee.
and the other thing is I wish that there were a lot more people here tonight. I'm a little disappointed in the showing.
That's
but the
okay,
other-
we're on TV,
I
and we're gonna,
understand, I
yeah.
understand. But the other thing I want to make known is we have had input from citizens. We've had input from neighbors, and we have reacted to that and tried to either address the issues or make some changes, and which we have done. So we encourage input from you folks. I mean, this is a town project. This is a town entity. It's there to help protect the whole town. So if anybody has any questions, any concerns, this is the time they need to be brought forward. So I just want to make sure that we
Yeah.
are as open as we possibly can and show, and explain what we have done up to this process and where we are potentially headed.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Skip. And I just want to say a thank you to the committee, too, for all your work. I know based on feedback from a few people, you guys changed your meeting times to evenings so that you could accommodate more public feedback. And a lot of the feedback during the concept development was really helpful. I know, for example, the parking lots were tightened and made smaller so that there was more of a buffer between, with the neighbor to the south. I know there was also a lot of concern about the wetlands, and that was definitely factored into the 3 or 4 versions that you guys took a look at. So a lot of that feedback came from citizens. Unfortunately, the participation has dropped off a bit, so we're hoping folks will be paying close attention over the next 6 months. So regardless of how many folks we have here, and we appreciate everybody coming, this is all going to be available on the town website as well. And it will lead us step by step to the next town meeting, so for those who can't make it out tonight. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the select board first? Heath, did you want to weigh in on anything? You've been working closely with the committee, and then we've had the committee, as I've said earlier, we've had the committee come quite a few times. Skip has, as well as John and Mark, have talked with the select board on a regular basis. So anything else from any of the other folks on the panels? Nope.
I would say, just
John.
from driving around town, for the people watching at home, that I'm actually always surprised by the amount of people that do watch this from home. So just, I don't know, not that they need to be defended, but that being said, I would be that type of person myself that would be probably interested in the topics, but probably watching from home. So when I drive around, I talk to people that are walking, or when I go on a call, they often bring up what we've discussed here. So I know a lot more people in town are very aware of this project and what's happening.
Thank you for raising that. I know we get quite a few views because I go home and I look at Facebook Live again when I get to see what's going on.
So,
Yeah,
the only other thing I would say is I want to reiterate what Skip said. I don't want to rehash exactly what he said, but I do want to encourage anybody who has questions or concerns that you're looking to get answers about what's going on, to please approach us and bring those questions forward to us so that we can get you the answers before a town meeting, on a town meeting vote. We want to get your questions answered, educated before coming into town meeting so that we can focus on the necessity of the town meeting that night. We are willing to answer any question that's out there. We're willing to listen to any ideas that are out there, any concerns. We're willing to listen to them. We want to hear them. I'm requesting if we can get those questions earlier rather than later so we can get you the information you're looking for. We're willing to give you that at any point in time.
Thank you, Mark. And I know you made that invitation at the last town meeting, and several folks either approached you or John or Skip. So any questions? Joanne, you're standing closest to the mic. And is that on?
He'll turn it up.
He'll turn it up for you. The mic's important, I know it's uncomfortable, but the mic's important because of the recording, so that way it'll sound better when people are looking at it later.
First, I want to thank Skip and all the committee. This is a very good review. Very informative, answered a lot of questions. My big question right now is the lot itself, and the way it's proposed, it divides the wetlands. And to me, that doesn't make sense. I would say to go back to Snow's or somehow and get the lot drawn so that it includes all of the wetlands out to School Street. See that? You're not seeing School Street in that picture, I don't think. And so we're missing, it would be strange to have the wetlands divided between the town and the Snows.
Andrea, do you want to answer that?
Are you talking about, there's a black line, do you see the black line?
The dotted black
No,
line,
but
Joanne?
the actual lot line to the right of the dotted
Yes.
line that connects. That's a separate parcel,
I understand that.
and there is, I don't want to jump the gun because there really hasn't been much discussion, but I've had some discussion with Julia from the Open Space Committee about some future ideas and proposals, and it is something I think that the town can look to expanding and working on, but so this doesn't preclude that.
I know.
I think
and
that's
it really
building on
should
that.
include it while we're doing the real estate part. That makes sense.
Well, it would be buying a different lot, and then that would mean also splitting a different lot because he may or may not want to sell the whole other piece. So,
Has he been approached with the idea of cutting off the rest of the wetlands and including it with this lot? That's really part of where all the trails go and start, is down by School Street.
right, so there's another lot that we feel that could be worked on. But because this one was complicated in having to be split as a lot, it's a different process. So going back and renegotiating that, well, it certainly wouldn't make a November 30th closing, but I just want you to know it's not off the table. It's
it's
something
not
that we're
off
very
the table.
interested in doing.
Okay. My other question is, I wonder if you're going to be putting solar panels on the roof, which makes sense. I think a lot of people will be concerned with that, about putting solar on the roof of the facility.
Let the developers speak to that.
We will be looking at many different green alternatives and energy consumption alternatives throughout the design of the building. We don't have that particularly nailed down yet. As I said, we're in very early concept phase, but we'll be looking at many different alternative materials, solar hot water heaters, and whatever else may be available for the project. Yeah, oftentimes, even if communities can't afford or don't want the green or the solar panels right away, we always now provide for a solar ready. So not only design the roof to handle that, should they be added later, but put in sleeves and conduits so that it facilitates the ease of installation at a later date.
We're also going to, just FYI, the Energy Committee reviewed all of, when we were hiring the architect, the Energy Committee reviewed all of those proposals. And we're also looking at getting the Energy Committee involved in this next phase. So we'll be talking more about how they can participate, because they've got a great, active, knowledgeable, including some folks who know about buildings as well as solar. So the Energy Committee, I view them as a critical participant in this next phase, just FYI.
The only other piece that I would add to that is that we obviously are going to have to build this building for the future. One of the things of the future when it comes to emergency vehicles is electric vehicles. So we're going to have to be looking at a sustainable way of being able to energize and utilize our vehicles even in a power outage as well. So I think that the solar question will definitely come into question when we get to that point.
Great, thank you. Ted, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, B. Can you hear me? Am I loud enough?
Yes, thank you.
I'm Ted Thornton, 60 Highland Avenue. I, too, want to applaud the participants for excellent presentation this evening. This is great. Looking at the slide up there and the orange area, am I right in assuming that that area delineates the building only?
The orange?
Yes, the orange.
But yes.
Okay, could somebody comment on how much area how much concrete around that building, including the entrance and egress areas, might be? An approximation is good enough, just to. Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering about. Yeah, this slide is great. I'm looking at the other one, just a rough idea in comparison with the landscape. Can you go back to the other slide? Yeah, and a rough idea of how much concrete around that building we're looking at.
We don't
Using
have
the
that
laser.
information right now. We're basically working on square foot costs for the building. We will have that information come our November design development submission. We'll have square foot costs for that and a quantity takeoff. We don't have that number yet.
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
One other quick question. I noticed on one of the earlier slides that the Mass DOT is going to be involved in December. Is that when traffic issues are going to be addressed on Main
Yes.
Street?
Yes, we'll
During
make
emergencies.
I'm sorry. We'll make an application to Mass DOT for the curb cuts, the new curb cuts this project will require, and they will have a multitude of questions that we'll need to answer as far as traffic, as far as Tony mentioned, sight lines, drainage along the street.
You want to call up that slide, John, so that you can point out the curb cut?
So basically, there's two new curb cuts along Main Street proposed. I think this is Pentecost Road right there.
Correct.
So before we make any new entrances into a state highway, Mass DOT is going to require us to go through an application process. Typically, that process can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months. And they review it with all their various engineering departments to make sure that it's safe and reasonable, not having driveways too close to each other, for instance, and other vehicular criteria. So we expect this is a fairly nominal curb cut, and we hope that we'll pass Mass DOT.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you,
if-
do you anticipate at this point additional signaling is going to be needed north and south of?
We don't anticipate signaling. We've done similar projects, very, very similar projects to this, and signaling was never requested in previous projects. The street doesn't have, I don't know what the traffic count on the street is, so I don't want to say for sure, but I've been here for a while, and I'm not sure that signalization would be required for this facility. There is an option, sorry, Skip, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So there is an option we have done on other facilities where you can put a flashing street light out there that's tied into a sensor that will go off with a fire alarm. But we've done those on private streets. You'd have to get permission, again, from Mass DOT to have one installed on a state highway. But
Yeah,
it
the other-
is an option, sorry.
The other thing I'd just like to reiterate, that actual question was actually raised, and I've done a preliminary look. And what I actually did was I actually parked my vehicle where those curb cuts are, they show. And I parked my vehicle and I looked at the proximity and I actually walked to the post office to see how far away just my Jeep Cherokee could be seen. And it, even though there's a dip there, there's enough of a terrain so you can actually see a vehicle parked on the edge of the road. So a piece of apparatus with, with lights and whatnot would be able to be seen by about the post office driveway.
Okay.
So as far as access or any additional signaling, I don't foresee it, but
I would see-
obviously it's up to the state. And when we did the final configuration that you folks are looking at here today, we actually reduced the size of the curb cuts and reduced them from 3 down to these 2. So to try to make it a little more amenable to the Mass DOT.
If anything,
you.
I could see
By all
the
means.
speed limit changing also. I could see the speed
Yeah.
limit changing in that area, which would actually be a good thing. I think we can all agree that that speed limit change there is probably needs to be changed anyways, but I could see that definitely changing with a building going in there.
Definitely a
So-
valid question.
Yes,
you.
and just a follow-up question to Ted's, does that come out in the Mass Dot, not being familiar with, well, I'm familiar with Mass Dot, but does that come out in the Mass Dot process that you go through? Would they advise you if they felt something else needed to be done, not just from the curb cut, but from a traffic safety or speed limit? Would they be advising you at that point?
Yeah, as
Okay, good.
part of MassDOT's review, they have an entire safety team. John and I went through this recently on a project where they dictated guardrails because there happened to be a culvert near there.
Okay.
They look at, you can't shed your water onto their highway and into their drainage system for the roadway. They look at every aspect of it. As John said, I don't see them coming back that there's so much traffic that they would require a light, but they could. We will definitely have signs, a couple 100 feet in each direction, just like you have now, the little fire truck sign to warn people that there's, apparatus
Right.
coming out ahead, but
Okay, and
much of that will come out of their review.
that's great, because I think that should be inspiration and motivation for going to the committee meetings, right? Because as you go through each process, one, that process itself would be public, but two, you would be reporting back to the committee on what had transpired with MassDOT and what they were requiring or suggesting, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Anything that's going to require changes and modifications of the drawings, details being added to the
Yeah.
drawing, we're going to report back to the committee.
Okay, so lots of good details coming out in phase two. That's what I keep telling people.
Yep.
Okay, other questions? Thank you, Ted. Oh, Steve. Where do you live, Steve? What's your name and where do you live?
94 Main Street, Steve Stroyer.
Nice to see you.
You're welcome. I just want to say thank you to the committee. You've earned it since the Beehive. That's a long time ago. Anyway, this discussion about the rec commission being involved on the property and whatever, is this viewed as a community building, quote unquote? I don't want to compromise the safety imperative of the building, but I'm just saying to you, is the building going to be available to the community in general for meetings and things like that?
I'll address that.
Go ahead,
We
Skip.
reduced the size of what we were gonna have as far as the community room. But like the fire station today, is utilized by the snowmobile club, it's utilized by the area dive rescue team for meetings, it's utilized obviously by the junior firefighters. So if there's a smaller group that needs a space, obviously if the fire department hasn't got anything scheduled, or EMS doesn't have anything scheduled for the reading and training room, or the police department doesn't have anything scheduled, my feeling is yes, it would be available to other entities in town.
I think we'll work out a policy or something on
Yeah.
that, because specifically, well, the answer that you've given earlier is the design was such that in order to reduce the parking footprint and the building footprint, you guys ruled out specifically building a community, using that training space, because otherwise the building would have to be bigger for community events, and the parking would be more spread out, and that was definitely a concern with this. So on a side note, with the old fire station, we're looking at getting some grant support for looking at possible future uses. Should this proceed and voters approve it, we would be looking in parallel at what we could do with the old fire station. And lots of ideas on that, so stay tuned.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
I would also add that the police department, for example, would expand some space also, just for the senior center. And we also,
Good point.
the fire department and also the police department run community type of events, like things that we haven't done in the past, but we're looking to do in the future, like a Citizens Police Academy or a Youth Adventure Academy. That would be a public type activity that's actually collaborated with the police, but it's also for the
So
public.
all that vast amount of space that you have in the basement there will be up for grabs in the town hall.
Yeah, the
Okay.
200 square feet.
Okay,
It's already been fought over.
yeah. Not that we don't like having you down there, but we would be interested in your space. Okay. Any other questions?
Close to apparatus going in and out.
Pam, I see you. Do you have any questions?
Further
Oh, Bernie.
and reduce the parking on that side of the building also.
No.
Oh, Bernie,
Buffer is grow.
Bernie Boudreau, did you have your hand up?
Microphone? Mary?
I don't think it's going to reach. You might have to stand up.
I'll just.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And then Pam.
Played with the cord.
Yeah, Bernie Boudreau, Select Board, Old Wendell Road. With reuse of the old fire station, is there any environmental things like asbestos or that that's going to probably, preclude us being able to use that building?
Well, just to speak, I don't know what you know, but we are having an assessment done. We're starting with the Regional Council of Governments and a DLTA grant for them to start the preliminary background work to look at the site, and then hopefully using that material to go into a one-stop grant in May. If this is approved in April, the timing works out that way. If this is approved, then in May, we would be applying for a grant that would give us further study into possibilities for design, engineering, and what other kinds of things the building might be used for. So the Regional Council of Governments is starting this sort of phase one, and they do a Brownsfield phase one assessment as part of the process. So they will be doing the initial exploration on that.
Okay, one other quick question. These are questions that I was asked by citizens. I told them that we have environmental consultants, and we did those, the site assessment. Is there any future things we have to do with the DEP or anything like that, or do we just file what we have from those environmental consultants? Is there anything further we
You
have?
want to talk
Well,
to that, Tony, about
sure.
what you take into the Conservation Commission and other bodies? Is that what you're asking about, Bernie?
Yeah, like I said,
Great.
these were questions I was asked, by citizens.
Yeah,
who weren't
thank
gonna
you.
be able to make this
Thank you
meeting,
for
so I
raising
wanted to
those.
Bring it up.
Yes, so through Conservation Commission and Planning Board, we'll be looking at every aspect, as I indicated, from amount of storm drainage, impervious area, amount of light pollution, are we using downward lighting, we're not casting light all over the place. all of those reports that are developed through either electrical engineer, civil engineering, all get passed through the various boards. They all become part of the public record, and those boards and commissions will tell us how to deal with it or whether it meets their acceptable criteria. Oftentimes, they will issue an order of conditions, and that order of conditions might be certain protective actions taken during construction, leading up to how it is ultimately turned over. So they're going to review erosion control during construction, minimize construction runoff, where waste goes, where topsoil goes, where are your tree stumps going, if you're stumping the site. Every aspect of both the construction and the finished product will be reviewed, and it all becomes public information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Bernie. I think the short answer, because I kept saying it at one of the committee meetings or select board meetings, so at the risk of repeating myself, many of the questions that people have will get answered in phase 2, because that's where all the details come out. Like light, noise, Conservation Commission, Planning Board, et cetera. A lot of those questions came up in phase 1, but they can't really be answered without more details, which come in phase 2, and when you actually go for the public presentations at those boards. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of, sorry, a lot
okay.
of the neighbors and a lot of the concerns that were raised at our previous meetings, you know, unfortunately, we had to say we're too early, right? We just don't have that information yet.
Right.
If folks are concerned about those very specific details, it's important that they go to those specific hearings when the project is presented to those boards and commissions. Because by the time we get to, you know, a building committee update or a select board update, we hope to get there and say, we've already had that hearing, here's what the summary is.
Right, here are the results that came out of it.
We're not going to get into maybe that extreme level of detailing questions at the building committee level or at the select board meeting, other than to say, yes, all of our documents are going to be presented and we're on a hearing board on such and such a date.
Excellent point. Really, for certain, you're absolutely right, and thank you for raising that. Because you guys have answered a lot of questions. I think the key thing is, if there's a particular area that you're worried about, is making sure those concerns get addressed by the board that actually has responsibility for them. And sometimes people get confused over, okay, environmental, wetlands, and most people know that's the Conservation Commission. So all of those meetings, just like any other public body, would be posted on the town website. So you're absolutely right. Thank you. Hi, Pam.
And just,
Good evening. Pam Eldridge, 111 Main Street. I just wanted to reiterate my thanks to the committee, everyone who's worked on the project. Most of the people here know that I've tried to participate by Zoom since the spring. I've watched the boring apparatus in the back of the library. I've paid attention to what's going on. But I am particularly thankful that my little individual concerns have been addressed in some of these changes. The location of the building, how it's sited, the movement down for the parking and a little buffer zone for our new neighbors that just bought the Shepherd's house. All of those concerns have been listened to, and I'm just one person, and I'm extremely thankful that my little voice has been heard, including the buffer zone, which I was very concerned about. So as skeptic to this project as it began, I'm a convert to accepting it and welcoming it to the neighborhood, and hopefully the changes will continue and will be honor townspeople's needs and wishes. But I'm really thankful. You've worked very, very hard. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam.
thank you.
And thank you for being such a diligent participant, too. We do appreciate your input and everyone's input. Okay, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn from the Select Board. So moved. Do I have a second? Second from Bernie. All those in favor? Aye. Skip, you want to close out your meeting as well?
okay, I'll entertain a motion to close out the Emergency Services Building Committee meeting tonight. Do I hear a motion?
So moved from Heath.
All those any discussion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for the
Oh, yes, indeed. No problem.
need my notes. Thank you.